Well, let me make it very clear that when I spoke in Punta Gorda, it was with respect to our maritime boundaries. The Saskatoon is not the maritime boundary. That's the river, riparian, not maritime. Okay? In the Constitution, our boundary is described referring to the 1859 treaty, and in down south, it is limited by the Saskatoon. I didn't comment on that. What I commented on was I said that it is difficult for our Belize, the Coast Guard, to be patrolling the seas because our maritime boundaries have not been defined. But if you give me enough time, I will show you that what I'm saying to you doesn't come from me. That is an accepted fact by every legal scholar who deals with international matters. I would just like to refer to these books that I have brought so that we can educate the Belizean people. You see, my capacity is twofold. I am the chief legal advisor to the government as the Attorney General. And as the foreign minister, I have to look after the foreign affairs of the country. As the chief legal advisor, therefore, I must know the law. Or I must know how to access it. And when I speak, I have to speak based on the law. I cannot make irresponsible statements, and you will see over the years I have been at pains to point out that I don't make irresponsible statements. Now then, fortunately when I was in Guatemala, S.G. Insulza gave me this book. I have given instructions for orders to be made in respect of this book because I think every Belizean should have a copy. And I would like your permission now to read from it. I hope you can capture it on the screen so that people can see it and acquire copies. I have given instructions for copies to be obtained, and I'll be happy to try to facilitate people in getting it. But let me tell you what Insulza says in relation to the boundary. This is a section that deals with the Belizean Guatemalan issue. All right? And it says here, all right, it says here, the agreement was signed on the 7th September 2005. In February 2006, a new round of negotiations began to address the maritime border with the involvement of Honduras as an invited party, since it shares a maritime border with both countries. This is negotiations between the government of Belize, the PUP government of Belize, because it's 2007. We didn't come to office until in 2008. So they started this new round of agreement and negotiations. It says, according to the agreed negotiation framework, the agreements reached on specific issues would not enter into force until there was an agreement on the entirety of the matters defined on the negotiation agenda. Throughout the process, the parties did make significant specific agreements on maritime issues. However, given that the rules of international law dictate that the maritime jurisdiction of states derives from the territory belonging to each country, and that, in this case, the land territory had not been defined, the parties were unable to resolve, after several meetings, the maritime matter. So that the PUP sought to negotiate the maritime boundaries with the PUP, with Guatemalans, but could not arrive at an agreement, because you only arrive at maritime boundaries after you have settled your land boundaries. And because of the Guatemalan claim, which puts the entirety of our boundary in dispute, we cannot, under international law, arrive at maritime boundary. Now, in 1993, in the hope of getting the Guatemalans to agree to our borders, especially the 1859 treaty, the then PUP government agreed to limit our territorial entitlement in respect to the Maritime Sea to 3 miles instead of 12, so as to facilitate the Guatemalans to pass through their own territorial waters. That was an incident which caused a big rupture in the UDP, and it caused a split between the UDP and Philip Golson and people like my brother Hubert and B. Cupis and the others. That was the Maritime Areas Act. The Maritime Areas Act doesn't define our maritime boundaries. What it sought to do was to facilitate the negotiation process by limiting our entitlement under international law. You see, in respect to our territorial seas, we have territorial seas, we have exclusive economic zone, we have the continental shelf, the inner one, the outer continental shelf, and we also have inner waters. Well, this Maritime Areas Act only related to our territorial seas, and we were agreeing voluntarily to limit that from 12 miles to 3 miles in the hope that the Guatemalans would have agreed to our 1859 boundary treaty. You see? When the Guatemalans failed to go through with that negotiation, because they're always having problems of one nature or another, and could not follow through with that, that particular provision lapsed. So the Maritime Areas Act doesn't really define our maritime boundary. Our maritime boundary is still to be defined.